All right. Welcome to Black Swan Revelations. Today, we are going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Danites. Should be fun. Going to do a little bit of a deep dive. I could literally spend hours on just the tribe of Dan. There's so much going on. I noticed in the comments somebody thought perhaps it'd be a good idea to talk about the Benjamites. I think we can have a great Bible study talking about the Benjamites. That's something I'll do in another video. I just want to say hi to everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? Hope everyone is well. I wanted to show this. Can I do it right now? Let's see. Maybe I'll show it later. All right, let's start off by jumping into Judges. I'm just going to read a little bit. I'm going to read an interesting story about the Danites. I think sometimes when we go through Judges, we just blow through it real quick and then we just move on to the next book. But there's lots of stuff going on, lots of stuff. So in Judges chapter 13, we basically get a story about Samson, arguably one of the strongest men in the world. You can say for sure in Israel, but man, this guy was a powerhouse. And it seems to be his weakness was women, specifically Delilah. And maybe one day in the future, I'll do a deep dive on Samson. But it's interesting to note that Samson hung out an awful lot in Philistine territory. He wanted a wife, hung out there a lot. The Danites were basically surrounded by Phoenicians, if you will, the Philistines on the southern end, the Amorites on the northern end, and then even further would be Tyre and Sidon. So in our last video, we're talking about the idea that the Danites were actually being squeezed constantly. And Samson comes into the picture and he judges Israel for 20 years. What's interesting is we have Samson being betrayed by someone close to him. So if we go to verse 20, Judges 16, verse 20, and she said, this is Delilah, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. So sometime while he was asleep, while his head was being shaved, the Lord departed from him. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. Which is interesting because Gaza's in the news an awful lot lately. And bound him with fetters of brass and he did grind in the prison, howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. So it's interesting that if you go through the book of Judges or even the book of Joshua, just one book before, you'll see that Israel was to occupy that land from the river to the sea. isn't it interesting that the enemies of Israel use this phrase to talk about the Phoenicians, or to talk about the Philistines, to talk about Gaza, to talk about the Palestinians living there? But really, when you go back to Joshua, he actually gave the land from coast to coast. So from the Mediterranean side of Israel all the way to the Jordan River. So that's the river. The sea is the Mediterranean Sea. So the river to the sea, that's where you get that idea from, one end to the other. And that was for Israel. And it goes all the way back to the Bible. But I wanted to share this story with Samson. He just got captured. The Philistines took him to their house to show him off to their god Dagon, which is a fish god. And you have to understand that all up and down this coast, and you can go all the way down to Egypt, all of these people that lived along the ocean or along the coast, they worshipped idols, and usually those idols are related to gods like Dagon and other gods of the sea. Which, when we're talking about Revelation, isn't it interesting that a beast rises out of the sea? And we're trying to build a case here as to why perhaps the Antichrist could come from the tribe of Dan. And I'm slowly, methodically building a case. But in order to explain why Dan is missing from the book of Revelation, we have to go back to the history of the Danites. And this is the first glimpse that we have of who these Danites are and what they're about and all this kind of stuff. And they hang around an awful lot around Gaza because their land was allocated to them just a little bit north of Gaza, and specifically five distinct regions of the Philistines outposts. These were their headquarters. This was given to Dan. And at this time, they didn't occupy this area because the Philistines were basically overrunning the tribe of Dan, and arguably also into Judah. Judah was submissive to the Philistines. The Philistines were running rampant in this area. So Samson gets caught, gets his eyes plucked out, which is interesting. Again, if we're tying the Danites to serpents or anything like that, it's interesting that serpents don't really use their eyes. They use their senses and all that kind of stuff. So there's some symmetry, or there's some imagery here with regards to Samson getting his eyes plucked out, and he's from the tribe of Dan. He calls out to God and says, "Remember me, strengthen me, I pray thee only this once, O God, that I might be at once avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes." And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars, which the house stood on it, and it was borne up, the one with his right and the other with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." So he killed everyone. He killed more people in his death than when he was alive. And his family came to bury him. They found him at this temple, and they buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol. Not sure where that is. I should look that up. Of Manoah, his father. So Manoah, his father, and his brethren and all his family came to bury him, which is interesting. And he judged Israel 20 years. One thing I should mention is the deal was for Delilah was that she was to get 1,100 shekels of silver that the Philistines were going to give her in order for her to betray Samson. Now I'm starting to sound like Dan Carlin. I don't know if you ever heard about this guy, hardcore history and all this. I love his stuff. I was always mesmerized by Dan Carlin saying, man, how can this guy just talk about ancient history? Like, he is amazing. He is second to none. There's no one better than him. He just goes on and on and on and on, and he has so much knowledge. I'm just talking about Dan here. Like, I don't have a lot of knowledge outside of this arena, but I find myself monologuing a lot, even when I talk to my wife or if I talk to my kids, and they're like, Dad, this isn't your YouTube channel. We need the condensed version. But here on YouTube, I can go longer than 30 seconds. I can go longer than a minute, because this isn't TikTok, this is YouTube. And some of you might be in the kitchen, you might be working, you might be driving. But the reason why I bring little nuggets like this is it's interesting that Delilah was given 1,100 shekels of silver to turn in Samson. And down the road, we'll see Judas do the same thing to Jesus. He turns him in for some silver. And I've always wondered, could perhaps Judah be from the tribe of Dan, because he actually is the son of perdition? He basically betrays Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ said, like, it's written that I have to be betrayed, but woe to that person that betrays me. It would be better if he were not born. It's interesting coming from the Savior, right? So Samson's dead, and then we go to chapter 17, the next chapter. And there is a man of Mount Ephraim. So he's from one of the sons of Joseph, Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said unto his mother, I'm going to paraphrase here for a second. Hey, Ma, remember the 1,100 shekels that you had, that you said this was under a curse? These 1,100 shekels, remember that? Why? Why were these shekels cursed? Well, it was because she betrayed an innocent man, Samson. They captured him, plucked out his eyes, and then put him in prison. And it was because of her that he got killed. So now the next chapter, we see her son, the son of this woman, and this woman is not mentioned. So maybe there was a reason why Samuel, perhaps, legend has it that Samuel is the one that wrote the book of Judges. That perhaps Samuel thought it best not to include her name anymore because she betrayed Samson. But it's interesting that there was a man of Mount Ephraim whose name was Micah, and he said unto his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from thee, about which thou cursest and speakest of also in mine ears, behold, the silver is with me. And I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my son. And when he had restored the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from my hand for my son to make a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will restore it unto thee. So at first glance, we're going to say, oh, this woman believes in God, because she said, I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from my hand. Turns out the reason why she wanted the silver was to make a graven image, which is illegal in Israel. So she wanted to make a graven image. And this is important because the Danites, by trade, are very good at making images. They love it. That's part of their DNA. And so she says, I will restore it unto thee. Yet he restored the money unto his mother, and his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the founder, who made thereof. This is what people that would make graven images were called. They were called founders, who made thereof a graven image and a molten image. and they were in the house of Micah. So, in the house of Micah. And the man, Micah, had an house of gods and made an ephod and a teraphim and consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. And in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And there was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed out of the city of Bethlehem, Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place. So this Levite is looking for a place to stay. And according to the law of Moses, they had pieces of land allocated to them. Specifically, I believe it was like 48 cities. And 3 cities of refuge on this side of the Jordan, and 3 refugee cities on that side of Jordan. But for some reason, this guy couldn't find work. Almost like every person was doing their own thing and they didn't care about the Levites. So the man left. He came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he sojourned. And when we see the Mount Ephraim, this is the area. So whenever we see that, that's basically geography for us. This is where these people would hang out, which is just north of Jerusalem. To the house of Micah, as he journeyed. And Micah said unto him, Whence comest thou? And he said unto him, I am a Levite of Bethlehem, Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said unto him, Dwell with me, and be unto me a father and a priest, and I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year. So this would be an annual wage for the priest. So this shows you how much money Delilah had when she got 1,100 shekels. She was rich at the expense of Samson. So Micah is willing to give this priest, and this priest is interesting because we later find out that this priest is actually the grandson of Moses himself. If that doesn't catch you, I don't know what else will. So now we have a priest that is descended from Moses himself, that is wandering, looking for a home, looking for employment, looking for a roof under his head. And Micah from the land of Ephraim says, Come be a priest for me, just me, 1-to-1. I have a priest. And Micah said unto, Dwell with me, and I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man was unto him as one of his sons. So it was basically he became a mentor, a spiritual mentor to Micah. And Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then said Micah, Now I know that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Levite to my priest. So if you have a Levite, according to what these guys thought, it was good luck. It was good luck for them. So chapter 18, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day all their inhabitants had not fallen among the tribes of Israel. So meaning the Danites don't have land yet. Joshua gave them land, said, here it is, go conquer it, and they still haven't. By the time we get to Judges 18, they don't have their land yet. And the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men from their coasts, men of valor from Zorah and from Eshtaol to spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, Go search the land. Who, when they came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they lodged there. And when they were by the house of Micah, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite. They recognized his voice. Interesting, right? You have Danites that recognize this Levite because I think he was a big deal. And I think it was perhaps because he was the grandson of Moses that they recognized him. And they turned in thither and said unto him, Who brought thee hither? And what makest thou in this place? Like, why are you here? Like, who brought you here? Why are you here? And what hast thou here? Like, what kind of money you making? What kind of cheddar? Come on, bro. Tell me, how much money you making? And he said unto them, Thus and thus dealeth Micah with me. It's almost like yada yada. Thus and thus, and hath hired me, and I am his priest. And they said unto him, Ask counsel, we pray thee, of God, that we may know whether our way which we shall go shall be prosperous. So they're asking advice from this Levite, saying, okay, basically, we're looking for land, but we need counsel from you. If you're really worth your money, tell us, are we going to be prosperous in our journey? Are we going to be rich in our journey? And the priest said unto them, Go in peace before the Lord. Before the Lord is your way wherein ye go. So basically, he gave them his blessing. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people that were therein, how they dwelt careless. Careless could mean they have no care for defenses. They are not very resourceful in this area. They are not huge fans of war. Instead, they prefer to have someone else protect them. And they saw the people that were therein, how they dwelt careless after the manner of the Sidonians, and the Sidonians were on the coast. So they worshipped all kinds of gods, fish gods, all kinds of stuff. And they were considered the same manner of the Sidonians, probably carefree, careless, no rules, just relaxing, no jobs. Who knows what they're doing? Just chilling. But it was like the Sidonians, and later we find out that Jezebel comes from the Sidonians, who's from the coast, and also we later find out that Jezebel is also mentioned in the book of Revelation, which is interesting if you think about the beast rising out of the sea and talking about Jezebel in regards to, I forget which church it was. I think it was Thyatira. So we have the Zidonians here, and these Laish people are compared to the Zidonians. They're quiet and secure, and there was no magistrate in the land that might put them to shame in anything, that they were far from the Zidonians and had no business with any man. And I shared that in a previous video, that they had no deals for protection. Nobody was protecting these people. Usually you can pay tribute or you can give money to someone and they're going to protect you. These people didn't even think about that. It was like they didn't care about arms. They didn't care about war. They thought that they were secure because they didn't have any enemies, or so they thought. And then they came to the brethren, to Zorah. So these are the 5 men. They went back to the Danites that were waiting, to Zorah and Eshtaol and the brethren, and said unto them, What say you, ye? Think about this. Think about this. Look what we found. And they said, Arise, that we may go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. Very good land. And are ye still? Be not slothful to go and enter to possess the land. So basically, these guys are very crude when it comes to speaking. They're basically, why are you guys being so lazy? There's unarmed people here. They have great land. Why are you sitting here, you bunch of lazy bums? Let's go. When ye go, ye shall come unto a people secure, into a large land, for God hath given it into your hands, a place where there is no want of anything that is in the earth. So they're basically saying that this land, go get it. God has decreed that this land belongs to you. Go take it. It's yours. And there went from them thence the family of Danites out of Zorah and out of Ashtael 600 men appointed with weapons of war. These guys are built for battle. And these are the Danites. Remember, their predecessor was Samson. Don't think that these guys didn't appreciate what Samson did. He killed a lot of Philistines. He killed more in his death than he did when he was alive. And don't think that etched into these Danites that one of their most famous leaders was Samson. And they went up and pitched at Kiriath-jearim in Judah. So they're on their way. Wherefore they called that place Manhandan unto this day. And that's a tribute that we're going to be looking at later. Anytime these Danites went somewhere, they always changed the name to their father, Dan. That was part of their DNA. That was part of their culture. Just think of it as placing a flag in the sand. They would change the name of the town or city or village that they're in and call it Dan. So they went up and pitched in Kiriath-jearim in Judah, wherefore they called that place Manhandan unto this day. Behold, it is behind Kiriath-jearim. And they passed thence unto Mount Ephraim and unto the house of Micah. So now they're approaching Micah's house. Remember, he has a Levite that is the grandson of Moses. And answered the 5 men that went out to spy out the country of Laish, and said unto the brethren, do ye know that there is in these houses an ephod, a teraphim, and a graven image, and a molten image? Now therefore consider what ye have to do. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you know what you should do. And they turned thitherward, and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, even unto the house of Micah, and saluted him. And the 600 men, appointed with their weapons of war, which were of the children of Dan, stood by the entering of the gate. They stood by the gate. Imagine 600 men at the gate, ready to battle, swords in hand. And the 5 men that went in to spy out the land went up and came in thither, and took the graven image upon the ephod, and the teraphim, and the molten image, and the priest stood. And the priest stood in the entering of the gate with the 600 men that were appointed with weapons of war. And these then went into Micah's house, fetched the carved image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. Then said the priest unto them, what do ye? So you have 600 men. The 5 guys go in. They walk past the priest, go into his house, take the idol, take the teraphim, take the molten image. And then the priest said to them, what do you think you guys are doing? And they said unto him, hold thy peace, lay thine hand upon thy mouth, and go with us, and be to us a father and a priest. It is better for thee to be a priest unto the house of... Is it better for thee to be a priest unto the house of one man, or that thou be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel. So they're giving him an ultimatum. Look, you could be a priest unto one guy, or you could be a priest to a warrior tribe, and we could pay you a lot of money. The priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod and the teraphim and the graven images and went in the midst of the people. He had no problem associated with Dan. So they turned and departed and put the little ones and a cattle carriage before them. So this is kind of interesting. So they're taking off to go to Laish, and they put their little ones and their cattle ahead of them so that they stayed behind. Why? Most likely they knew that somebody was going to come and attack them because they just robbed the house. And when they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men that were in the houses near to Micah's house were gathered together, and they overtook the children of Dan. So they were coming to take out Dan. And they cried unto the children of Dan. And they turned their faces and said unto Micah, what is your problem? What aileth thee, that thou comest with such a company? Look at this. What is going on in your world that you would come to us with your little company? Look at all these people. Oh, look at these warriors. Probably rubbing elbows with all the Danites saying, look at these guys. Oh, we're so scared of you guys. Why are you coming here? What aileth? What's wrong? Almost sarcastic. And he said, this is Micah, ye have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priest, and ye are gone away. And what have I more? And what is it that this, and what is this that ye say unto me? What aileth thee? So he's basically saying, look, you took everything from me, everything that I've ever owned. And now you have the audacity to say to me, what aileth thee? And the children of Dan said to him, let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life with the lives of thy household. So basically the Danites here, the 600 of them, are saying, shut your mouth, or one of these guys is going to run you through, and we're going to take out your entire households. As in, we're going to go back and we're going to burn it all down. So shut your face. And the children of Dan went their way. So they basically turned their backs on Micah and his army and went to Laish. That's how unopposing Micah was and his force. That basically the Danites are saying, look, watch yourself. One of these guys, man, I don't know. Like, I can't hold these guys back. But I just have to snap my finger and these guys are just going to wipe you out. So shut your pie hole. And he turned and they left. And they took the things which Micah made and the priests which he had, and came to Laish unto a people that were quiet and secure. Basically, a group of people that minded their own business. And they smote them with the edge of the sword and burnt the city with fire. And this will come up later in another video, because this was their MO. This was their style, was to attack villages that had no army. And they would slaughter them. They would butcher them, and then they, just for fun, they would burn the whole place down. Unto a people that were quiet and secure, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt the city with fire, and there was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no business with any man, and it was in the valley that lieth by Beth Rehob, and they built a city and dwelt therein. And they called the name of that city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born unto Israel. Howbeit the name of that city was Laish at the first. And the children of Dan that set up the graven image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom. So this is Jonathan, the son of Gershom. Who's Gershom? Gershom is the son of Moses. He and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan unto the day of the captivity of the land. So the children, the great-grandchildren of Moses, ended up serving the Danites until they got carried away, until Israel got carried away by the Assyrians. And I would argue with you that the Danites actually fled because they were men of war. Their MO is not to always attack on land. They were learning, evolving to be able to take their battles to sea. And whenever they would come across a village that was unarmed, they would take them out. That's why they were interested in being at sea all the time on the Mediterranean. So this just gives you a little snapshot of who these guys were. They were idolaters. They were murderers. They were warriors. They were fierce. They feared no one. And they now had the great-grandson of Moses to help them out as a priest, help them establishing their own religion. And we'll see that a little bit later. But this is their DNA. This is who they are as a tribe. This is what they're known for. So much that later we'll actually see the first Israelite king after Solomon dies, the first northern tribes of Israel, their first king was Jeroboam. He set up 2 golden calves, one in Bethel and one in Dan, because he was worried that people would go back to Jerusalem and serve under Rehoboam, which is Solomon's son. He didn't want that. So out of all the places in the 10 northern parts of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, the 2 best places that he could think of is Bethel, where Jacob had a dream and said, look, I see all these angels ascending and descending, Jacob's ladder. That's where they built 1 golden calf, if that isn't insult enough to Israel. The second calf seemed like the most logical place out of all the places that were dedicated to idol worship. It was Dan, Laish. So they put the golden calf in this place as well, so that if any foreigners came to Canaan, they couldn't help but see this golden calf there. They're like, wow, we are approaching a country that worships idols. And then from the south, anybody that would leave Jerusalem or leave Judah, if they would venture into Ephraim, they would know we are now entering in to a golden age of calf worship. And this is all the start of Judges. Like, we see this all through the book of Judges. And I won't go on about all the other tribes, but I think it's very important when we're talking about Dan that we don't think that they absolutely were like King David, that they loved Yahweh, that they loved God. They did not. They were idol worshipers. And this is something that if you get this, you're going to understand that this is part of their makeup. This is part of their tribal makeup when they go seafaring into the Mediterranean Sea. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the idea that these people would rather be at sea fighting battles, finding villages, finding monasteries, finding peaceful nations and attack them. That's their MO. That's what they're very good at. And where did they get all this idea from? Where did they get all this technology? Well, this is where we get into my presentation. So that was like 40 minutes of just giving you a bit of a background on the tribe of Dan and why they are the way that they are. So now we're going to dive into a little bit more. How did we get the idea that these Danites could be the legendary Vikings? How do we get there? How do we get there? And then how do we get to the point where we actually have to tie this into why they're missing from the book of Revelation? So let's go over to this. Let's have a gander, shall we? All right. Let's see here. So Moses and the Danite craftsmen. So let's just jump into this here. The first time we see a Danite, let me just make sure you guys can see that. Okay. The first time we see a Danite involved in engraving is when God commands Moses to build the tabernacle. Eliab from the tribe of Dan was chosen for this work. This is found in Exodus 31:6. And I behold, I have given with him Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, and in the hearts of all that are wise-hearted, I have put wisdom that they may make all that I have commanded thee. So this tells us that the Danites were skilled engravers, and this is going to come out more importantly later when we talk about the Vikings and how these guys were actually skilled at engraving stone, combs, weapons, boats, houses, fences, weapons, all kinds of stuff. That's what they were known for, the Vikings. So the Danites were skilled engravers and craftsmen from the beginning, but instead of using their skills solely for God's work, they later became known for engraving tools. The name Aholiab in Hebrew means the tent of the Father, or Father's tent. Isn't it interesting that Moses used this guy to help him not only make tents for the tabernacle, but also to teach other people how to build tents? Because remember, Israel lived in tabernacles, little tents, little houses, little huts, while they were in the desert. So, again, this guy's name means tent of the Father, or Father's tent. So if you break down the name, my tent, which is O Holy, or tent of Father, Ab, Father, right? Abba, Father, tent, O Holy. The Danites were known for making tents, and tents are essentially sails when used on ships. If the Danites later became the Vikings, this could explain why they were such expert seafarers. So we'll talk about the Danites and their tent making skills. The tribe of Dan had a strong connection to the tent making because of Eliab's name, which means tent of the Father, suggesting that tent making was an important craft in the tribe. Israelites lived in tents during the wilderness journey, and Dan was one of the largest tribes, Numbers 2:25-31, meaning they would have skilled tent makers. Tents required strong woven fabric, wood supports, and rope, all of which are essential, coincidentally, for shipbuilding and sailing. So tents and sailing, how do we connect this? How do we connect tents and sailing? Well, tent fabric is similar to sail fabric. Ancient sails were often made of woven linen or wool, the same materials used for tents. Tent poles were used, which are similar to masts. A tent requires strong wooden beams, just like ships need masts. The Danites already knew how to stretch, fasten, and repair tents. These are the same skills needed to repair sails on long journeys at sea. So the Viking and ship sails. Viking ships had large rectangular sails made from woven wool, stretched across a wooden mast. The Vikings needed to maintain, repair their sails constantly, something a skillful tent maker would have already known how to do. So the question now is, were Danite tent makers also sail makers? The Bible confirms that Dan had tent makers, and history confirms the Vikings mastered sailing. So remember, the Danites were seafarers, Judges 5:17. And why did Dan remain in the ships? If the Danites migrated north, they would have used their tent-making skills to create sails, making them perfect candidates for becoming Vikings. So if the Danite craftsmen like Elohim were skilled in tent-making, engraving, and metalwork, it makes sense that their descendants could have evolved into Viking shipbuilders, carvers, and sailors. So we know not all Vikings were Scandinavian, but all Danites were Vikings. That's what they were known for, is to invade other defenseless people. So if we break this down, the Vikings were a broad group, including Scandinavian, Normans, and other raiders from different regions. Some Vikings settled in places like Russia, the Rus, Normandy, the Normans, and even parts of the British Isles. The Danites, on the other hand, had a distinct identity. They were one of the 12 tribes of Israel, but they were also seafarers, craftsmen, and raiders. So if the Danites migrated north and became the core of the Viking culture, then while the Vikings may have included many peoples, the Danites were the true origin of the Viking spirit, seafaring, carving, and even idol making. So while the Vikings were a mix of different groups, the Danites remained a distinct bloodline that formed the heart of the Viking culture. So remember Jacob's prophecy of Dan, the serpent in the path? Jacob prophesied about each of his sons, and when he spoke of Dan, he used a serpent analogy. Genesis 49:17. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider fall back. This is one of the most cryptic prophecies in the Bible, but it perfectly fits the Viking movement and culture. So Viking river travel, like a serpent weaving through the land. The Vikings were notorious for being able to weave through rivers that were quite shallow. It was shocking to many of the villagers. They were surprised that any ship could get through, let alone these Viking ships. Vikings were known for weaving through rivers, traveling deep into Europe via Volga, deep Dnieper, Seine, and Thames. Their long ships snaked through the waterways, twisting like a serpent through the land. Just as Jacob prophesied, they would strike suddenly like an adder and attacking villages, monasteries, and cities before disappearing back into the rivers. So before we jump into how good these guys were at attacking, some people might be saying, Shane, I still don't get the connection of Dan. Like, why are you saying the Danites are Vikings? Like, aren't they just aren't the Danites just kind of like a myth? Like, isn't the Bible just a fable and all this kind of stuff? And aren't the Vikings like a myth and mythical race and all this stuff? Aren't they like blue-eyed, like Thor and all this stuff? And I think that's what happens with history sometimes is you'll never hear this in school. You'll just see the historians or the history teachers just say things like, oh, these Vikings came down from Denmark and from Sweden and Finland and all this stuff. And they just showed up out of nowhere, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, all this stuff. But in essence, whenever you see a Viking, you could almost say the Vikings were very Danite in culture. They mimicked the tribe of Dan, which was just after the Bronze Age. So if you go back to Dan, you have to ask yourself, so, okay, they're tent makers, Shane. I got it. They're tent makers. Cool. Why would you say that they are seafarers, and why would you say they traveled across the Mediterranean Sea? Well, we know the Danites lived on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, on the left side of Israel, surrounded by the surrounded by the Philistines, and they also had the Amorites to the north of them, and even further north, you have Tyre and Sidon. In this time frame, where Dan was occupying this area, Tyre and Sidon was second to none when it came to ship building. Yeah, I feel like I just put on this sweater, so I don't know if I have a little bit of an allergy. I'm hoping it'll go away. But yeah, it sounds like I have a little bit of a nasal allergy. Hopefully it goes away. I should have had a coffee, really. All right, so hopefully we can get through this. I don't have a cold. I feel great. Just allergies kicking in. It's in the last 24 to 48 hours, it jumped 40 degrees in Calgary. It was like minus 30 something the other day with wind minus 40. It was plus 10 today. It's like almost 50-degree difference in the last 2-3 days. And sometimes I get a little bit allergies when this happens. So anyways, the Danites live close to Tyre and Sidon. Sidon and Tyre are known at being the best in the world when it comes to building ships. There is nobody better than them. Nobody better than seafaring. So imagine intermingling with them, because we know the Danites traded with them. We know that they also intermingled with their wives. We see this at the beginning of Judges. And if you're going to be taught by the best shipbuilders, wouldn't it make sense that that was the area that they lived in? And imagine the trait that the Danites could bring to the table, and that is tent making. So if you just tweak it a little bit, these guys would be the best at making the best sails. And now you have them mixing with these shipbuilders. Back to the prophecy of Jacob, he said that the Danites would be a serpent in the pathway that strikes at the heels of the rider, of the horse, of the rider, and the rider would fall back. Adder's kind of interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that in another video, but an adder is a different type of snake. Adders can actually swim in the water. Obviously they're waterproof, but I've seen videos where these things are swimming along the water on a coast somewhere. And in another video, I might show some of these snakes. But isn't it interesting that an adder goes like this when it goes in the water? I'm sure it does that on the ground. I've caught many snakes in my time when I was a youngster. But these adders are also very venomous as well. They're poisonous. The reason why I bring up adder is there's a certain style that the Phoenicians used to build their ships. They would take, it was called crinkers. So basically, they would take one plank and put it underneath another plank and lock them together and then seal them with pitch and tar and all kinds of stuff. Very similar to the ark, how the ark was fashioned and pitched together with tar and all this kind of stuff, pitch and mortar, whatever they used. But the Phoenicians were known to use ships to build the hulls with planks, and they would stack one plank underneath another and layer them up so that when they're in the water in the Mediterranean Sea, if they hit a wave, these ships would actually kind of twist a little bit, like the hull would twist. They weren't solid. They were able to absorb some of the waves, almost like when you see a serpent moving in the water. And now you have the Vikings that have the same style of ships as the Phoenicians found in Europe. Whenever they crashed, whenever they sunk, they found these Viking ships. And we know how they're designed. They're designed with planks as well, and they're long. And often they would have a serpent head at the front of the ship and a tail at the back of the ship. If that doesn't say Dan, I don't know what else does. That's their whole MO, is being a serpent in the pathway. So these Vikings built their ships with these crinkers, these planks, and they would lay them one in front of the other. And they were so light that if they got to shore, they could flip them over and carry them on their heads and go across to the other side and then drop them back in the water and continue on. And this was shocking to people. They had no idea how fast these ships can catch speeds up to 17 knots. And don't ask me if I could swim that fast. But they're all over that whole area. Sweden, Ireland, Finland, Denmark. Again, I mentioned in the last video, in the Hebrew alphabet, there is no vowels. So when you have D, Dalit means door, and you have none, which is N, you have two types of none. You have regular none or middle none, and you have final none, which is basically a line that goes straight down. So you have Dan, DN, and you could insert any letter in there. You could say Den, like Denmark. You could say Dan, like Denmark. We know Denmark used to be called Denmark before it became Denmark. You could say Don, which is interesting because you think about Donald Trump. His name is Donald John Trump. Kind of interesting. Not saying he's the Antichrist. But it's interesting that Don could be Dan, could be Don, any one of those. Dan, Don, Dan. That's important, especially when it comes to Hebrew. So now you have a door, D, a pathway to a serpent, because that's what final N means, is serpent. Regular N or middle N means seed, means rising, means sprouting. So we know that there are two seeds that go all the way back to Genesis 3:15, Genesis 3:16, where there will be enmity between your seed, the devil, and his seed or her seed, which is Christ. Two seeds. One is the serpent seed, Antichrist. The other one is Christ himself. And Jesus even said in John, I forget which chapter, but he said if you take this wheat and you throw it into the ground, it will rise again. Talking about himself being that seed. So I find this stuff quite fascinating, and we're going to go a little bit more deeper in our next video, getting more deeper into now what were the Vikings known for? Like, what are they doing? Like, how do we know that there's ties from these group of people called Vikings to the tribe of Dan? We're going to talk about rune stones. We're going to show pictures and images. These stones are at least 1,000 years old, at least 1,000. And they're carved by the Vikings. And how the Vikings would do it is they would carve a stone and they would do it in the shape, they would engrave on the stone a shape of a serpent, and they would put their letters to tell a story at the serpent's head, and then the story would weave its way through all the way to the end, to the tail. So if you just happen upon one of these ruined stones in, let's just say in Sweden, and you see a stone beside the road, which is interesting because it's along the pathway, and these Vikings would put a story about their family saying, hey, we moved into this land. I had a wife. I had a couple of kids. We conquered some territory. This is what happened. And this is where I was buried, whatever. That would be all the story inside the serpent. So out of all the people in the world, the Vikings tell their stories through serpents. It's actually, you can't make this stuff up. Like after a while, you'll see so many ties with the Danite type culture. And remember, they were expert engravers that helped Moses out. God put his spirit in them to help him build and carve things, including the Ark of the Covenant, shaping cherubims into gold, like shaping these things. That's not an easy task. Making trumpets, all kinds of stuff out of silver, making tents, all kinds of stuff. These Danites were pros at it. And then if they lived on the coast and you see Phoenicians that are like, hey, we need help with our sails. Do you guys know anything about this? Yeah, we're tent makers. Oh, great. This would be a great relationship. Look how we build these ships like serpents on the water, sea serpents. There's so many ties here. It's crazy. So that's it for today's video. I hope you got something out of this. We will continue with our video series. Hopefully I don't have allergies. So annoying to have allergies. The more you think about it, I'm sure if I got up and walked around, it would clear up. I think it's the sweater because I don't usually wear the sweater. Could be a little bit dusty or something. I don't know what it is. Sometimes if I wash it in laundry, I have an allergy to certain soaps. Anyways, that's a side note, but it is what it is for today. So apologize for that I sound like a little bit nasally today, but hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully it wasn't too distracting to you guys. But thanks for sticking around. Appreciate you guys, and I will see you in another video. Bye for now.
Black Swan Revelations here on YouTube brought you today's mind-bending journey. Dive into the discussion, your comments, questions, prayer requests, and powerful testimonies of Jesus' love are what fuel this community. Did today's episode hit home? Smash that like button. New here? Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a live stream or a video upload. Thanks for being part of today's adventure. Catch you in the next video, or maybe even in the clouds. Stay curious, stay blessed.